I'm Ernie Chambers, and I'm going to start with a little intro that I used to give every time when I was on a public access television station. Friends, enemies, neutrals. Today, it's hard to know precisely who is a friend, who is an enemy, who is a neutral. Sometimes people who are the worst enemies know how to put on the friendliest face so they can get close enough to you to do harm. Somebody who seems to be an enemy is merely a person who is straightforward and honest in expressing his or her opinions. And if they happen to disagree with yours, you might take that as a sign of this person being an enemy. But human beings are described as Homo sapiens, wise animals. Now, the wise, I don't know if that's true, but it means you can think. If you use your brain, then you will consider the facts that surround a situation and draw an appropriate conclusion and act in a way that's appropriate for an intelligent person. There is another little saying: he who knows not is ignorant. He who knows not that he knows not is a fool. Shun him. He who knows not and knows that he knows not is teachable. Teach him. He who knows and knows that he knows is wise. Follow him. Sometimes we think because of the way people speak, the way they dress, the political party they say they belong to, we can properly and completely judge who and what they are. But unfortunately, in this society, in these times, people are more interested in pleasing others than they are in pleasing themselves. Although I'm well past youth, middle age, and some people would say prime. In other words, I am old. When you reach my stage in life, you'll understand the meaning of that verse in the Bible that says, my days, my years are faster than a weaver's shuttle. You realize that no matter how good your health is, physical health, how keen your mind is, because we are products of this material universe, and we are members of a species that has a beginning, birth, and end, death. We know that the human body is only going to last a certain number of years, and we should do the best we can with the time that we have and not worry about the time that we may not have. Worry can put you in a situation where you will shorten the time you have. So begin by loving and respecting yourself more than you do anybody else in the world. That's what you should do. When Jesus was approached, and there are a lot of people out there who pretend that they believe in Jesus, and he was asked, what is the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second commandment, that is like unto it: love thy neighbor as thyself. When Jesus spoke, it was always with the caveat, even though not spoken, that you are going to behave as somebody who's got a functioning brain and intelligence, and therefore you're going to behave in an intelligent manner. So when he said, love your neighbor as yourself, he meant that if you're intelligent, you are going to follow the first law of nature, which is self preservation. You're going to do the things to maintain your life. And to do that, you have to maintain your health. One thing leads to another and another and another. There's an interconnection throughout the universe, throughout your life. So, an intelligent person will want to do those things that will maintain him or her in good health with a clear mind. And what you want for yourself, being an intelligent person, is what you should want for your neighbor. And who is my neighbor? Jesus gave a parable. He always used parables. Stories are what catch people's attention. They will listen. He used parables, allegories, metaphors. Those are words that describe what you're saying when the words that you speak do not mean literally what those words mean. The words stand for something. If it's a fable, for example, you give animals the power not only to think, which they can do, but the power of speech. And they speak whatever language the people who are being told the story would speak. So you should love yourself above all others. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, not as they do unto you, because you're supposed to return not evil for evil, but good for evil. There are so many fine principles out there that a person would probably run out of life before he or she ran out of all of those kinds of principles expressed in every society, every civilization, every collection of people on this earth or wherever else they may exist in this universe. Jesus did not say, love yourself as you love your mother, because there are mothers who've done some bad things. Not love your neighbor as you love your father. Fathers have done bad things. Not love your neighbor as your brother. Cain and Abel were the only two people on earth other than their parents. They were brothers, and one was a murderer. So, loving your neighbor as you love your brother may not be enough, because you could be a brother like Cain. He didn't say love as your sister. There was a young woman, her last name was Borden because her mother got married, and her first name was Lizzie. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her father 20 whacks. And when she saw what she had done, she gave her mother 21. Lizzie Borden was put on trial. Lizzie Borden was acquitted. But ever since that day, Lizzie Borden is viewed by people as a vicious axe murderess who escaped justice. But those who are to make those decisions, the jurors who hear the evidence, came to the conclusion that she did not commit this horrendous murder. So, according to all the standards by which a person is judged in this society as a member of this society, Lizzie Borden was not a murderess. There were no witnesses. So, all that could be used would be the evidence that the law allows to be introduced. When all that evidence had been taken, Lizzie was found to be not guilty. Why am I going through all of this? Have I said anything that anybody listening did not already know? Maybe you would not have said it the way that I say it. It's not the first time you've heard it in some form or other. One of the best ways that I've heard it was when Whitney Houston sang that song about learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. And unfortunately, she let a fool into her life who caused her to not love herself. She loved him more than she loved herself. She lost her way. She lost her self respect. She lost her life. But before that came, she sang that song. And if you listen to the words and think about them, they are better guides for listening and living than you could find in any sermon ever preached, because she did it with music. And what is music? A concord or a coming together of sweet sounds. Sounds. If I give one note, ah, that's not music. But if I hold it, ah, it becomes a tone. Not a very good tone if I do it. But there are other people who will make you forget all of your cares and woes if you listen. I am a person who is the most feared and hated person in Nebraska. Feared because I will stand for myself, speak what I believe, whether I'm talking to or about the governor or the president. Yes, I ran Jimmy Carter out of his East Room. He was the president of the United States. I have an article that proves what I did when I had been invited to the White House. I am not going to look at a person's badge or title and determine that I'm going to hold my peace or bite my tongue when I ought to speak. I am hated by the police, yet I don't carry a gun. I don't commit crimes. I've not hit anybody in the head. But you know why they fear me? Because whether they would express it like this or even be conscious of it, a loaded brain is more powerful than a loaded gun. And that's why they will try to do things, not just the police, but others to undermine me when they'll look the other way, when there are people robbing, cheating, and stealing. The loaded brain is more powerful than the loaded gun. When I wore a younger man's clothes, I often use that expression. Words came from a song by Billy Joel. I like a lot of his songs. It was called, the one I'm talking about, The Piano Man. Now, I cannot sing at all, but an opera singer told me everybody can sing. Now, some people sing better than others based on the way judgments are made. But he said, I got to think of how this starts. And the usual crowd shuffles in. There was an old man sitting next to me, making love to his tonic and gin. He said, Son, can you play me a memory? I'm not really sure how it goes, but it's sad and it's sweet, and I knew it complete when I wore a younger man's clothes. So I often say, this is the way it was when I wore a younger man's clothes. I was often arrested. I understand that when people die, they talk to each other. And there was a conversation among John Dillinger, Al Capone, Legs Diamond, Machine Gun Kelly, Pretty Boy Floyd, uh, Bonnie and Clyde, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. I know them first and last names. And they said, that Chambers has an arrest record that would rival ours. But the only difference is he was never convicted. He was not guilty of what they arrested him for. And I've said that, so I decided today I would give a few examples. And this is before I was in the legislature. But before I go into that, I worked, strike that. I'm going to mention when I worked at the post office, there was a lady named Celestine. Some people pronounce her name Celestine. I don't know if anybody is still alive and watching this who knew this lady. And she and I worked at the post office, and she said, Ernie, have you ever seen The Godfather? I said, no. She said, if you get a chance, watch The Godfather. And I never got a chance. But I talked to somebody one time who was talking about The Godfather, and I said, "This lady told me that I should watch The Godfather and pay attention to Sonny. What? Who is this Sonny, and what did he do?" This person said, "Well, Sonny was really protective of his sister. He was a member of a crime family, and the crime families had feuds. So one night or early morning, Sonny got a phone call. All the voice did was mention that his sister was being held captive and gave an address. Sonny did not wait for anything. He took the caller at his word, jumped in his clothes, jumped in his car, and headed for that address. And he had to go across the river and he had to stop at the toll gate in order to do it. And when his car stopped at the toll gate, suddenly, wham, not one shot, shots rang out, and Sonny was wiped out. When I saw the lady at the post office again, I told her that this person had told me about Sonny because she didn't tell me. She said, Ernie, that's what's going to happen to you. I said, what do you mean? She said, you get these phone calls all times of the day and the night, and you get up and go down to that police station by yourself, and they could set you up. And I said, they could, but they haven't yet. And I'll know that happens when it happens. It's difficult now as it was then for me to be aware that somebody is out there alone being set upon by a crowd or a group, and especially the police. So when I got a call and this person said a family member was locked up, or the person mentioned that he was making his only phone call and I was the only one he knew to call, and could I come down? And if I was there, nothing bad would happen. I didn't ask questions. I got up and I went. My wife asked me, why would I do this? And that I have children of my own. I said, and my children are now reaching the age when they may be treated like this. And if it happened to them and I'm not there, I would like somebody to be willing to step in. So that's what I would do. And the police could not get me for selling drugs. They couldn't even get me for cursing if that had been a crime. I don't curse, never drank, never smoked, never did drugs, didn't chase women or men, little girls or little boys. I was what you would call a square. I stayed to myself. I had my own thoughts, but I guess I was more actively involved in this community and things that happened to people who couldn't help themselves than anybody else. My mantra, in addition to the one that, like Popeye, I am what I am, and that's all that I am, this community is in my blood, and my blood is in this community. I could have had much money, but money did not mean anything to me. It's necessary. But when I worked at the post office and on construction, and I would get checks, I would give my mother all my money. But, and people know this, it's not going into personal business. My mother and my father at some point were separated, and I stayed with my father. He and my brother Eddie would find checks of mine uncashed that I used for bookmarks and books. I didn't need money. When I went to the army, I sent all of my money to my mother. I told her when I was little, you bought me clothes, fed me. Well, in here, I get clothes, I got a place to stay, I got food, and I don't need the money. So I gave it to her. I donate to causes now. Not that I'm rich. Like the song says, I'm a man of means by no means. But what little means I have, I'm willing to share it with those who have even less than I have. So when the police didn't like what I was saying, they could never arrest me and say that I cursed them out because people knew I didn't do that. They couldn't shoot me and say I pulled a gun because people knew I didn't carry a gun. I was just, to use our expression in the old days, some of y'all won't even know what this is. I was as clean as Clorox. Now I'm going to give you some examples from the newspaper. This is dated October 16th, 1967. Since I was born in 1937, 30 plus 30, from 37 to 67, that would make 30 years old. Here's the headline: Delay until Friday for Chambers trial. Assistant City Prosecutor William Gallup postponed Monday the trial of Ernest W. Chambers on an assault and battery charge on Friday. Edward Murphy, a candidate for mayor on an all white program, has accused Mr. Chambers of pushing him. This fool and his partner lived on 33rd and Parker. You all know where that is now. He had a junkyard. They were trying to raise some money to get George Wallace on the ballot so George could be a presidential candidate. And this fool wanted to run for mayor. And he had come to the barber shop one day, and Dan knew who he was, and Dan stopped him, wouldn't let him come in. So this fool went downtown and filed a complaint against me for pushing him, and I was charged with assault and battery. What do you think would happen if I went to a white barber shop? They didn't want me there, and I tried to get in, and the white barber stopped me, and I went to the police. You know what the police would do? They would arrest me for harassing the white man. This racist came to the barber shop. He knew that I worked at the barber shop. He accused me of pushing him. That's nothing. But nevertheless, I was charged with assault and battery. So what happened? That was October the 16th. 4 days later, after Friday, judge rules for militant. My name is not militant. A black man who speaks up always has to have a title. Black radical, black militant, always, but not black man. Let me read this article. Assault and battery charge dismissed. And here are the circumstances that came out during the trial. A charge of assault and battery against Ernest W. Chambers was dismissed by Municipal Judge D.B. Anderson Thursday afternoon. Mr. Chambers of 3219 North 27th Avenue, I lived in the projects. I lived in the projects. I worked in a barber shop. I'm an ordinary man. Look how I dress. I dress like ordinary people. You will not find anything as ordinary as I am. In fact, ordinary is less ordinary than I am. But to go on, Mr. Chambers, a Negro barber known for his militant views on civil rights, was accused of striking and pushing Edward A. Murphy of 3302 Parker Street, September 28th. Mr. Murphy, a candidate for mayor on an all-white program who once proclaimed he was the leader of George Wallace for President movement in Nebraska, testified that when he started to enter the Spencer Street barbershop, Mr. Chambers ran toward him and something like, "We don't want a dirty Wallace supporter in here," struck him in the chest and pushed him toward the door. Edward Whitley, 72, of 3432 Decatur Street, identified as an elderly Negro man for whom Mr. Murphy was seeking help, said he saw Mr. Murphy pushed, but he could not identify who pushed him. This old racist got this black man, who one time he tried to get some help for, to come and speak against me. But the old black man said he couldn't identify the person. Mr. Chambers testified that he was not at the barber shop at the time, but was at home babysitting with his 4-year-old child and working on Omaha's Model City program, for which he is a consultant. Yes, I was hired by the then mayor, A.V. Sorensen, who couldn't stand the sight of me, couldn't stand the sound of my name, but there was a federal program called Model Cities. And this was based on the problems that existed in a city and the plans that could be put together to address them, which would determine how much federal aid they got. These white people who didn't like me knew what I was about. So the mayor knew that I've got something going on upstairs. He paid me, and this was a little money in those days, $100 a week to study the Model Cities program that they put together, evaluate it, critique it, and turn it over to him. And as I testified in court, yeah, I took the witness stand. That's what I was doing, plus babysitting. Can you imagine that? A militant black man with militant views on civil rights babysitting A 4-year-old child, little children are my heart. Jesus said it first, but I agree with him. He who offends against one of these my little ones, it were better for him that a millstone be hanged about his neck and he be drowned in the depth of the sea. So, continuing the article, he testified that he never did and never would lay a hand on Mr. Murphy. Asked by Assistant City Prosecutor William Gallup if he opposes Mr. Murphy's political beliefs, Mr. Chambers said, quote, I'm opposed to anybody who preaches hatred or racism, unquote. 4 defense witnesses upheld Mr. Chambers' testimony that he was not at the barber shop. So the charges were dismissed. I wasn't even there, but I had to stand trial. That was an arrest. Then here is an article 26 days after that trial. Policemen find time for tagging chores. Edward Murphy, the one who accused me, took the floor of a public hearing in City Hall last week to protest Omaha's proposed annexation of Millard. Omaha doesn't have enough policemen to serve its own citizens, Mr. Murphy said, let alone having to contend with Millard. At that moment, Omaha police were outside towing away Mr. Murphy's pickup for illegal parking. It cost him $12 to get his pickup out of impoundment. Mr. Murphy decided to protest in municipal court. He was fined $1 plus $6 costs. He went to court and he lost. That was one false arrest. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I wanted you to see the first one. Here's one. It's date. Oh, let me tell you about one where I didn't actually have to go to trial. Dan and I used to go get breakfast even before I worked in the barber shop, and I couldn't even drive a car, but Dan would drive me when I needed to go somewhere. And we were at 24th and Lake, stopped at the light. We were heading east. When the light changed, Dan turned left to go north on 24th toward the barber shop. A cop car pulled us over and stopped us. He wanted to search the car. Dan said, I said, you can't search this car. If you got a warrant, he said, I don't need one. And Dan said, I think you do. This man is in law school and he said, you need a warrant. I think you do. He said, no, I don't need a warrant. I'm arresting you two on suspicion of armed robbery. And Dan and I looked at each other. He said, you look like 2 guys who committed an armed robbery. What could he see of me and Dan? And it was dark. A man with a white t-shirt, and I forget the color of Dan's shirt, but how could he identify us, even if there had been a robbery, as men who looked like those who had committed a robbery when we were seated in a car? Well, we went downtown and arrest. Going with me could be harmful to your health. So they had us in this room. Dan was taken in a room to be questioned first, and I was sitting there. I was so eager to go in the room that I was actually trembling. I was trembling, and I wanted to go in there. So when the door opened and the cop came in and Dan came in, I jumped up and the cop said, "That's all right, Mr. Chambers. You can sit down. You can go." And they let us go. That's the way they did things. That was another false arrest. Here's one. And there's a picture of me with my hands cuffed behind my back. 1969, Chambers is arrested during racial outbreaks on Omaha's near north side. And here's something that is said about another incident. But in this one, I was charged with carrying a concealed weapon, and it was dismissed when it went to court. The prosecutor dismissed it. And I had on a t-shirt then, a turtleneck, and there was no place for me to conceal a gun, but that's what I was charged with and arrested for. That's what they did to me. That's the third arrest. Then here's one that said school absenteeism high in Omaha. This was March 7th of 1968, the article. And it talked about the, well, I'll read. Absenteeism continued high in Omaha schools with heavy Negro enrollment Wednesday, and reports of minor vandalism continued while officials mapped new moves to relieve pressure on the city's troubled racial situations. There were disturbances. Then I'm going to go down to this other part. One step calculated to ease the tense situation was the decision to move the Class A state high school basketball tournament from Omaha to the capital city of Lincoln, 50 miles away, where three other class tournaments open Thursday. Omaha has four schools in the Class A finals, including top ranked Omaha Central, led by 6'7" Negro center Dwayne Dillard. Dillard was a whale of a basketball player. He died young. Now, listen to this. Dillard was arrested early Wednesday, along with five others, on suspicion of possessing explosives in violation of Nebraska's 1967 anti riot law, leaving his turn appearance in doubt. You know how come that law was passed in 1967? Terry Carpenter was there. He got it passed. He knew about me. White people in Nebraska knew about me. And Terry Carpenter said, one thing about that black guy, he's smart. He's not going to do anything wrong so you can get him. So we have to pass the law to catch him, even if he hasn't done anything, meaning that you can make an accusation. And Terry made it clear on the floor of the legislature he wanted that anti riot law to get me. And guess when it got repealed? When I got to the legislature. But that was later on in a different story. Let me read this about Dillard. However, Dillard was released without bond Wednesday after Ernest W. Chambers, militant Omaha Negro leader, now not just a barber, but a leader. They designate our leaders. I said, you don't call the president a white leader. You don't call the mayor a white leader. You don't call the white superintendent of schools a white leader. Don't call me a black leader. I don't lead anybody anywhere. But at any rate, militant Omaha Negro leader promised Municipal Judge Paul Hickman and County Attorney Donald Knowles he would have Dillard in court for a March 20 hearing. Now, I'd been arrested several times. I'm a militant Negro leader, as they call me. Why would they release these young men charged with having explosives to me? Let me go on. I will assure his appearance better than a bond, better than a bondsman, and better than a policeman, Chambers said. When Hickman and Knowles agreed, Chambers thanked each and said, you are reasonable men. Now, the cops, they busted me. The county and the judge, they trusted me. If I'm all these bad things, how many people could go down to a hearing before a judge and say, release them to me without bond, and I will have them in court and they be released? See, there are a lot of black people who don't know things that I was about, and some know, but they don't like other things because I interfered by the way I carried myself with their attempts to get money from white people, especially Warren Buffett, Susie Buffett, and from those days, favors from mayors. That wasn't my stick. So I was arrested and charged with carrying a concealed weapon, and that was dismissed. Now, let's go up a little farther. This is the following year, 1969. Four charged with felonies during near North unrest. Four persons, including Negro activists. I went from being a Negro barber, a Negro with militant views, to being a Negro leader, and now a Negro activist. Four persons, including Negro activist Ernest W. Chambers, were charged Monday with felonies in connection with arrests on the near north side over the weekend, arrested and charged with a felony. Chambers, 31, of 3219 North 27th Avenue, and Daniel M. Goodwin, 37, of 4106 North 18th Street, were charged with carrying a concealed weapon. Not concealed weapons. He'd have one, I'd have one. We were charged with carrying a concealed weapon. I guess he held the barrel in his hand, and I held the butt of the gun in my hand, and they charged us with carrying a concealed weapon. Chambers and Goodwin, arrested early Saturday, were free on $500 bond. And you know what happened in that case? Charges dismissed. That's what Al Capone and John Dillinger and all those fellas talking about were upset about. All these arrests and his charges were dismissed. And when he went to court, they were thrown out. And he was a colored guy. We're white and Italians. Look what they did to us. Anyway, here is what happened in 1971, 2 years later. Another charge brought by Omaha police against State Senator Ernie Chambers has dissolved. Municipal Judge Walter Cropper said conflicting testimony forced him to dismiss an obstructing traffic violation against Chambers. Carrying a concealed weapon, dismissed. Assault, dismissed. Obstructing traffic, dismissed. But see, they never charged me with what you could call a morals count. That's just a few of them. Now, what I'm going to regale you all with is the transcript, because I had another arrest. The barbershop in those days had kind of a vestibule in front of the door. That means when you open the front door, you didn't step right out on the sidewalk. There was a concrete little platform, and you walk on that and you step down onto the sidewalk. I was standing on that step, and a police car pulled up into the bus zone, which was right in front of the shop. His partner got out and went to get some chicken or fish at a fish house 2 doors away. And the cop looked at me and I looked at him, and he said, "What are you looking at?" He was on the passenger side. I said, "I'm looking at you." And so he said, "We're going to go downtown." I said, "For what?" He said, "You're disturbing the peace." I said, "We're going to go downtown for disturbing the peace. What did I do that's disturbing the peace?" He said, "You disturbed my peace." I said, "How?" "By looking at you." He said, "We're going downtown." So he took me by the arm. I walked in, I got in the police car. Here's what came out in court. State of Nebraska versus Ernest William Chambers. Judge Honorable Eugene Leahy. He was a judge before he was the mayor. Then we come up. "You've been charged with disturbing the peace and interfering with an officer. How do you plead?" Mr. Phillips, who was my lawyer, "Not guilty." The court, "Any opening statements?" Prosecutor Dunning. Now, I don't know if he's kin to the Sheriff Dunning, but there are a lot of Dunnings in law enforcement, and they're shaky. "No, Your Honor." Mr. Phillips, "None, Your Honor." The court, "A plea of not guilty has been entered." Prosecutor Dunning, "Officer Podolsky came to testify. Having first been duly sworn on oath by the court, testified as follows." Direct examination. Prosecutor Dunning, "Would you state your name to the court?" Answer, "Frank Podolsky." Question, "Where are you employed?" Answer, "Omaha Police Department." Question, "Were you so employed on the second day of April 1965? Answer, "I was." Calling your attention to that particular morning, at an approximate location of 3122 North 24th Street. Were you present that morning? Yes, I was. Did you see the defendant, Ernest Chambers? I did. Can you point him out? Right there, indicating. You're pointing to the man sitting by his attorney, Mr. William Phillips? Yes. What were you doing at that location? I was standing in a bus zone waiting for my partner to come out of the Fish Delight, which is a few doors down from the barber shop. Which barber shop is this? Spencer Street Barber Shop. I believe that's the name of it. And an elderly lady, colored lady, come up to the cruiser and asked me if this is where the bus stop was, and I told her it was. Did this lady leave, or do you know who she is? No, I don't. She went back and stood by the building, and one of the barbers come out of the Spencer Street barber shop and went over to the old lady, and he had a piece of paper and a pencil in his hand and pointed to the cruiser in an investigating manner. He pointed his pencil at the cruiser in an investigating manner as to whether or not I had answered her in a civil manner or that type of thing. So I paid no attention to that. And he went back in, and Mr. Chambers come out and stood there just staring at the cruiser. And it didn't make any difference to me. If it made no difference, well, I'll read. I again started writing some stuff on the pad we used for our reference information, our daily. And Mr. Chambers went back into the barber shop and came back out with a pad and pencil and started writing down information as to the cruiser. How does he know what I was writing? But you know how cops are. They read our minds and whatever they say is taken, and they are taught to lie. So I got out of the cruiser and I asked what was going on. What is the matter? And he said, it is none of your business. Can you imagine that? A black man telling a cop something is none of that cop's business? Why, I'm lucky he didn't shoot me. So I walked up to him and I asked him for his identification, and he refused to give it to me. Here's the way that conversation went. I want to see some ID. I said, I'm not going to give you any identification. He said, well, I'm an officer of the law. I said, look, man, I'm on private property. This is where I work. I don't have to give you anything. That's the way the conversation went. I said, he doesn't put all that in what I said, let's go down to the captain's office and get this thing straightened out. So he went and got in the cruiser with me. And on the way down there, he said, am I under arrest? And I said, no, we're going down to the captain's office and get this thing straightened out. He said, then I advise you to take me back where you got me. I said, you are under arrest for disturbing the peace. Aren't you supposed to be arrested before you're put in the cruiser? But this is the way cops do. And this is the testimony. Continuing, did he voluntarily get in the car? I took him by the arm and he didn't resist the arrest at all. The arrest, but see, I wasn't arrested at that time because he admitted that he didn't put me under arrest until I was in the car. But anyway, cops lied. Question: how far had you gone when he said this statement? What am I here for? Answer: probably about 6 or 8 blocks. Now, how long have you been working that part of town? A little over a year. Did you know Mr. Chambers before this? I never have seen him before. You think a cop could work in that area of North Omaha for a year and have never seen me? And I was everywhere. I was being arrested and so forth. But cops lie. They're trained to lie. And they're told once you tell a lie, you stick by it, no matter what. You were on duty and in uniform? Yes. What was the time after you talked to the elderly lady that Mr. Chambers came out, approximately, if you know? Immediately after the elderly lady went back to the building, one of the barbers come out and talked to her first, and then Chambers come out after that. Question: was there any complaint ever filed by this lady, or did she complain at all at the scene to you? No. Did she ask you for some information and you give it to her? She asked me if this was where the bus stopped, and I said yes. Did she seem satisfied with that? Yes. Prosecutor Dunning, you may cross examine. Mr. Phillips, you suggested you were standing in the bus stop. Yes. You were seated in your cruiser car? Yes. And you were behind the driver's seat? Answer: behind the wheel. Were the windows down or up when the lady approached you? They were up. Could you hear what one of the barbers said to the old lady when he approached her. As much as I could tell, he pointed out me, that officer. Beyond that, could you hear what was said? As far as what he asked her, I really couldn't say, but he did mention me. If he couldn't hear, how did he know that Dan mentioned him? But anyway, he pointed in your direction as far as you know. He pointed to me. You were looking at him at that time? Yes. Did the barber then return to the shop? Yes. Then Mr. Chambers came out? Yes. Where did he come out from when he came out? He came out and he stood by the on the stoop, the front. Is there a vestibule sort of in front of that barber shop? Can you remember? Yes, there's a doorway there. Can you remember whether he was within or outside of the vestibule? He was standing on the step, more or less outside of the vestibule? Yes. And he was writing something? Yes. Did you later learn what he was writing? No. You don't really know what he was writing with regard to your cruiser car? No, I don't. Did he take this pad with him when he went into the cruiser car? I don't know. He took me by the arm in a cruiser car. I had the pad when I was riding. He didn't know whether I had the pad when we went into the car. Cops lie. They're trained to lie. You indicated your partner was at the fish shop. Yes. I presume he was making some investigation that was police business. My partner was picking up some sandwiches. What else were you doing while you were waiting for him there in the bus stop? Just sitting there, more or less. I was writing down on the pad that we carry for our daily report that we make out later. Now then, after Mr. Chambers stood there, you asked him what he was doing? Yes. Did you get out of the cruiser car at that time? I did. Then you invited him to go in the car with you and he come down. Oh, and come downtown? Yes. And at the time he asked you whether or not he was under arrest, you think you were about 8 blocks away? Yes. Did anything else occur at that time? What do you mean, anything else? You indicated that he was under arrest. I would like to know what you arrested him for. At the time Chambers asked you to return him to the barber shop, I presume he was in the cruiser car. Yes. Was he hostile in any way while he was in the cruiser car? Well, he was not hostile. He was very argumentative. See, a black guy is supposed to be scared of the cops. He was very argumentative, especially bringing up the civil rights end of it. Were you and he arguing about his conduct? Yes. I couldn't see why he couldn't give me identification or answer my questions. What else did he do? That's about all. Will you tell us your partner's name at that time? Officer Jack Sanchez. Did he strike you in any way? Strike me? No. You didn't strike him? No, there was no fracas at all. I say just arguing about what he did. Was there any other reason for placing him under arrest? Just for interfering? What was he interfering with? And listen to the court. Now, I was charged with interfering with an officer. The court, the prosecutor made no objection. The lawyer asked, what was he interfering with? The court. I believe this is argumentative. I don't believe we should go into that. Wasn't that the issue? My lawyer could not ask, what was I interfering with? And the judge would not allow the question. That was Eugene Leahy. They named the Leahy Mall after him. Mr. Phillips, is there any other conduct of his that you wish to tell the court about that he did at that time? Just outside of his general attitude, very obnoxious and smart. That's what he didn't like in a black man. And I went to jail. When you say obnoxious, what does that mean? The way he talked, like we were committing some type of a sin by taking him to jail. Phillips, I believe that's all. Anything further? Redirect examination from the prosecutor. When did Officer Sanchez return to the car? About the time that I was taking Mr. Chambers to the car, my partner came out. And this location is in Omaha, Nebraska. Yes, it is. Dunning. I have no more questions of this witness. The court, you are excused. Then Officer Sanchez takes the stand. Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. Jack Sanchez, having been first duly sworn on oath by the court, testified as follows. Would you state your name to the court, please, Jack Sanchez? Are you a police officer for the city of Omaha? Yes, sir. Were you on duty on the second day of April 1965? Yes, I was. On that morning, were you on duty over on 24th, 31, 22, 24th Street? Yes, I was. You have heard the testimony of Officer Podolsky? Yes. Did you stop at any time to get some fish sandwiches? Yes, I did. When you returned to the car after getting fish sandwiches, did you see Officer Podolsky and the defendant, Ernest Chambers? Yes, I did. What was taking place at that time? I was waiting for the sandwiches, and I seen my partner, Officer Podolsky, motion me out, and I came out without the sandwiches. I seen there was some kind of argument. Now, Podolsky didn't say there was an argument at that time. He invited me to come to the car, had me by the, and I went voluntarily. Cops lie. They're trained to lie. I seen there was some kind of argument. So I went over and asked her what was wrong and what this party said to her. And I guess he asked her if my partner had answered her in a civil manner. And I said, is that all? I came back. My partner had Chambers by the arm and he said, let's go downtown. Did Mr. Chambers enter the car voluntarily? Yes. And what happened on the way to the station? Oh, there was some argument between him and my partner, as Officer Podolsky has already testified. And as far as I'm concerned, he was arrogant and he even tried to pick an argument with me. Aren't you supposed to be sitting back here with me? That's police procedure. I was in the front seat. I said, I didn't think you were a desperate criminal, and I just let it pass at that. If I was not a desperate criminal, why was I placed under arrest? All of it. This is the way the cops do. Question. Did after a certain number of blocks, he asked what he was doing there or something to that effect? He asked if he was under arrest. And what did your partner state? No, we're going downtown to the captain and get this thing straightened out. He said, well, take me back. I know my rights. About how far away was this from the original place? Around 6 blocks. I couldn't tell for sure. Prosecutor Dunning, I have no more questions. Mr. Phillips, with reference to the little lady, you were the officer that spoke to her to find out if something had happened to her. Is that correct? Yes, I did. And she said nothing had happened to her as I take it? Yes, she stated Officer Podolsky had answered her question. And she indicated one of the barbers had asked her if one of the officers had answered her question in a civil manner. Yes. And she indicated there was no other involvement, nothing wrong, and the three of you entered the cruiser car and started downtown. Yes. And about 6 or 8 blocks away, I take it, the defendant asked if he was under arrest. Yes. Up to that time, had there been some continuing discussion in the car, or were things pretty silent? Just after he wanted to know if the reason we was taking him down, that was because if he was a colored man. See, the other officer didn't mention that I brought up race. Question. Was this discussion somewhat continuous when you got into the cruiser car or within some blocks after you began to leave from that location? He was talking quite a bit all the time. Was anyone talking to him? Once in a while, my partner was talking to him, perhaps a little heated. I would say so, yes. Then, about 6 or 8 blocks away, he asked if he was under arrest. Yes. And following that, he was told he was simply going to the captain to try to straighten out the incident. There was a call to the captain, and he said something. He wasn't going down to the station. This must have happened before you got into the cruiser car. Yes. All right. At this point, 6 or 8 blocks away, when he asked if he was under arrest, was this from the point where he was taken from the barber shop and after, uh, that is, when your partner placed him under arrest? And you seen any violence in the cruiser car? No violence. How about profanity? The court. On whose part? Mr. Phillips, anybody, the witness, I don't recall any words. Mr. Phillips, either of the three individuals, you or your partner, Mr. Sanchez? No. Redirect examination from the prosecutor. Officer Sanchez, how long have you been working this area? A little over a year. Is this area predominantly colored? Yes. So, in other words, you've been working with the coloreds in this entire year. Yes. Prosecutor Dunning, I have no more questions. Phillips, no more questions. Prosecutor Dunning, the state will rest. Mr. Phillips, the defendant moves to dismiss on the new evidence on the ground that the officers were not performing any duties. Prosecutor Dunning, any officer sitting in a cruiser is performing his duty. Mr. Phillips, he was waiting for fish sandwiches. They're not allowed to eat during an 8-hour duty. He was having a lunch. I assume he was not performing any duties. The court, that will be enough of this, Mr. Phillips. This is a lot more serious whether or not a policeman has a right to a sandwich while on duty. At this time, I will sustain the motion to dismiss. This is a serious incident, gentlemen. Then in parentheses that the court clerk wrote, at this time, the court admonishes counsel and all parties concerned. Why would I, an innocent man who is not arrested but made to get in a police car, admonished? And when I brought up the fact that I know my rights, that was the basis for the cop being so offended that he put me in a cruiser and driving downtown. And when I asked him, am I under arrest? He said no. Then what am I doing in the cruiser? Wouldn't that be a false arrest? But that's the way white cops do. That's what was happening to me on a regular basis. That's why I talked about the long arrest record I have. No convictions. They wanted to harass me. They thought that they could intimidate me. And the fact that I never did anything that was against the law. I knew whenever the cops put the grabs on me, I hadn't done anything. I wasn't going to cringe. I was not going to break down and blubber. I was not going to cry. You heard them both say that I was argumentative. A young black man in a cruiser with two white cops arguing with them, arguing about civil rights, mentioning the fact that I'm black and that's why you got me in this car. And then tell them, if I'm not under arrest, take me back where you picked me up. Whoever heard of a black man talking to white cops like that? They got guns and he's unarmed wearing a t-shirt. But see, that's the kind of person that I was, the kind of person that I am, except that I'm older now and probably look a little different from the way I looked then. But I went through a lot of things that caused me to have the attitude that I have now. And because I lost track of the time, I'm going to try to get a signal as to how my time is just about up. So I have not gone over yet. The next time I talk, I'm going to mention some of the things that the FBI was concerned about. And during one of those arrests, the cop acknowledged that I was mugged and fingerprinted at the request of the FBI. And in order not to go over time, I will sign off with what's going to become my usual, if I remember it. As the canary said, when his cage door was left open, I'm Ernie Chambers, and I'm out of here. See you next time.
Thank you for watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.